Welcome in. It is the Northside Baseball Podcast. I'm Mitch Whitmire. He is Matt Trueblood, talking anything and everything Chicago Cubs baseball today. However you get your podcast, maybe it's via our website, Northside Baseball, our YouTube channel, or however you get your podcast, maybe it's Apple Podcast. We always appreciate anyone and everyone that tunes in. Matt, appreciate you taking the time. Busy day for you. You're at Target Field. You just chit-chatted, yourself in the media with Rocco Baldelli, huh?
Yeah. Juggling multiple balls as always, but it's a good thing. We're in a good place.
Let's talk Cubbies baseball per the usual. I feel like the bullpen has been a constant topic in recent podcast episodes for us. I know a lot of articles on the website lately have covered different elements, different angles of the bullpen. I kind of wanted to hone in today on Daniel Palencia. He's kind of in the spotlight. He's had the closer's role for the time being handed his way, and I think he's kind of taken that opportunity and ran with it for the most part. So I wanted to pose the question for you, and again, for who's ever listening, you can kind of ponder it as well. I was just thinking, and I watched his outing in Philadelphia on Monday. For those listening or watching, we're recording Tuesday before the game against Philadelphia for a Wednesday publish, and the Cubs ultimately lose that game in extra innings, but it didn't really waver the confidence that I currently have in Palencia. And so I'm wondering, are you kind of in that pocket with some of the other Cubs fan base that believes Palencia should be the permanent closer for the Cubs moving forward? Not that they need to, necessarily come out and anoint him or announce it to the world, but it's one of those things where maybe you let the actions speak instead of the words, and the action of kind of rolling him out continually in the ninth inning to kind of slam the door would be speaking volumes about the trust that the Cubs have in him.
Yeah. Are you permanent if you're permanent for now?
Yeah.
It's really a philosophical thing. It's like, is permanent closer a contradiction in terms? And I think it might be, but I don't see an urgent need to replace him. I'll say that for sure. I agree with you that, Monday night's thing, that was really not on him. That's one of those really, like, many layers of frustrating game as a fan. And I think if you gave even some players, certainly managers and coaches, truth serum, they hate that game where you're in the middle of a long stretch without an off day. You're trailing going into the late innings, and then you tie it up. But you only tie it up. You never take the lead. Well, not till the 11th. And now suddenly you're using more pitchers than you expected to. The whole game feels sort of wrong-footed, and you just have this dread. The chances are you're not coming out of that with a win, especially against a good home team. And that's just how it felt. I think overall Palencia has been great. Even last night, he did quite well on the whole, throwing more strikes, and that's the key for him. There are more rough edges you can still sand off his game, but if he's in or around the zone, he has a unique fastball, a different one than like Porter Hodge or Justin Steele or the things that the Cubs typically do, but it's unique in its own way and not just in terms of velocity. And the mentality seems right. I think he's matured in terms of how he keeps his center in big moments in games. So, yeah, I don't see any reason that they need to rush to replace him. Certainly, I wouldn't replace him with anyone who's currently in the organization, including Porter Hodge. If an opportunity comes up at the trade deadline, I still think you have to pounce on it. I don't think he's, earned that kind of like, this job's off limits. No others need apply. But again, part of that is just we live in a day and age when the closer role is not permanent for anybody, but he no longer needs to be thought of as just a stopgap.
Yeah, well said. What do you think about, you kind of hinted at it a little bit, whether it's fair or not, right or wrong, a lot of fans, when you talk about the closer role, they talk about the stuff, right? Like the guy's got to have stuff to come in the ninth inning and try to get 3 outs. And the stuff with Palencia, I think, is headlined by the fastball and the velocity. And, you look at his StatCast page and he's 99th percentile in fastball velo. He's 95th in barrel percentage. Guys just aren't getting the barrel to him. 76th in strikeout percentage. There's a lot of good with Palencia, but when I look at him, if you talk about just like the stuff that he brings to the table in his repertoire, I think it does kind of speak to a guy that maybe could be a closer and maybe could figure it out for the long term. But I do agree with your take initially, Matt, that right now he's the closer, but it doesn't need to be. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the closer come September, October. I think if he is, it probably speaks volumes to how well he's pitched, more so than it would say anything else about the rest of the Cubs bullpen. But what do you make of his stuff that he has?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that we've gotten a little too maybe fixated on velocity, especially because, when you dig that extra layer deeper, stuff often doesn't mean velocity in this day and age. The things that rack up strikeouts in the league tend to be nasty breaking balls, tend to be great changeups, that ability or, unique movement patterns. But so it's not just that he throws 102, but you do have to miss bats, I think, to be a trusted closer. You can't have somebody who's just going to come in and, even if you're great at managing contact, you don't have much margin for error by definition. That's what a closer should be. If if it's a 3-run lead that you're protecting, well, great, you do have that margin for error, but then pretty much anyone can shut it down. When you think of the closer, you think of that guy who can preserve a tie when you're pitching, on the road, maybe even in extra innings with the Manfred man starting on second. That has added a huge extra dynamic of please miss bats, because even a productive out to lead off the innings, big trouble. And he misses the bats. So that's really all it comes down to. Does it have to be 102? No. But that does make it a little more, I think there's an extra intimidation factor sometimes with that. And when that he's feeling it, and normally he sits 99, 100, but it does come up to 102 because he's really into the moment, that, if some of your value comes from your velocity, the extra adrenaline you find in those big moments might bump up your value. Whereas for other guys, it might hurt it, because if you overcook a slider, that's not good for anyone. But an extra tick on the fastball is usually not going to hurt.
I want to extend this out just one layer further, and really it ties into an article that you published, I think it was yesterday, on Monday, and I love the title of it. The title of your article, Matt, was "The Truly Mystifying Historic Starts of Chris Flexen and Drew Pomeranz's Cubs careers." So I'm like, where are you at? And Palencia's lumped into this conversation, surely. Where are you at with the Cubs bullpen? Whether it's confident wise, and just how are you feeling about where they're at? Because, like your article stated, you add Drew Pomeranz, you add a guy like Chris Flexen. I think Keller's been phenomenal, but you added him, in the offseason. But what some of these guys are doing is above and beyond what the Cubs had to have expected.
What anyone could have expected. I mean, it's just, it does not happen that two guys who are right off the scrap heap walk in, and for their first 30 plus combined innings, they don't allow a run. That's nuts. And it's, some of it is that they happen to move in just as the Cubs are moving into a softer stretch of the schedule, which they're now moving out of. We know where that all sort of stands. I wouldn't want to take this bullpen right into October, but we know that they don't have to either, right? Porter Hodge is already on the comeback trail a little bit. I think you hope that your rotation gets a little healthier, and that's going to move some people into, Colin Ray might well be filling what is currently the Chris Flexen role come October. And I feel better about that, because Colin Ray is a better pitcher than Flexen, even though Flexen's been tremendous so far. What it is proof of concept that, the Cubs can still do this scoop a guy off the scrap heap. And sometimes it's give him a new thing. Sometimes it's tweak an arm angle and mechanics like they did with Flexen. Sometimes it's just give a guy a chance who's ready. He's healthy enough and he's ready to come back. I mean, Drew Pomeranz is the same guy he was 4 or 5 years ago when last he pitched in the majors. Just he's healthy and he's got this opening and he's made the most of it. Again, I think that they need some sort of reinforcement. That'll come in July. That's what this phase of the season is. But right now, the bullpen's good enough. It's not great. It's not the best in the league. It's good enough as long as the rest of the roster is doing what it's supposed to.
Let me just ask you a final question about the bullpen. I think it's a fun one. It's certainly subjective. Everyone can go different ways with it. Who in the bullpen has been the biggest surprise for you? Because the reason I asked the question, Matt, I go to Pomeranz because of the 4-year gap pitching in the majors. And so I tend to lean in that direction, but I'm always open to hearing other arguments and other cases made for others in that bullpen.
No, I think it's Pomerantz. I mean, I know others, present company included, I think, have been pretty surprised at how well Caleb Thielbar's pitched, right? But
especially off last
sitting,
year.
Right. But
Yeah.
I'm sitting here in the Target Field press box. I've seen Caleb Thielbar go through some stuff and come out the other side of it, and the stuff was never really gone with him. So I sort of anticipated that we'd see a bounce back there. I would say Pomerantz is the one that you just can't, because again, there's no one thing to explain it. The shape on the pitches, the velocity. Brad Keller went and found 2 or 3 extra miles an hour at a pitching lab in Georgia over the winter. Well, that I can make heads and tails of, and even before he did that, I had marked him out as a pitcher who made a lot of sense for the Cubs based on his pre-existing profile and their needs. So that one, no one was expecting this of Brad Keller, but it doesn't shock me in any way. Pomerantz shocks me. I would have guessed that you try it and either broken by now, or teams would go, yeah, this thing that worked really well when you were throwing 94 and the curveball off of it doesn't work as well when you're throwing 92 and the curveball off of it. But so far it does. So yeah, he's definitely at the top of my list.
Yeah, me as well. Northside Baseball Podcast. He's Matt Trueblood. I am Mitch Widmeyer talking Cubs baseball. I mentioned this to Jason last week, and we or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, and we kind of got a laugh out of it, and he agreed with me. As much as there's certain podcast episodes when I'm laying out the topics, as much as it's like, you know what, I should try to fill it up one episode without mentioning PCA. It's increasingly harder and more difficult to do that when you go, a full week between episodes and he's always dazzling or doing something in the field or something in the batter's box. I'm going to preface by saying I saw this brought up in an article the other day and I just found it wildly fascinating. PCA, as you know, Matt, currently leading the NL in WAR. And I think we knew the base running, the defense would, help hold it up, but the offense has taken it to an entirely different level this year. And the article I saw was via SI, and they noted that PCA is trending towards being close when it's all said and done this season to having a 10-plus WAR season, which hasn't been done by an NL player since Barry Bonds in 2004. So I think when you want to talk about all the bullet, and there's a long way to go this year, but when you want to talk about all the bullet points, what could end up being footnotes in the season that was for PCA, if he's able to accomplish that, it'd be absolutely incredible. The guy constantly is amazing. Fans, broadcasters, reporters, everything. It's hard to go a full week when we do these podcast episodes without talking about him. I'm curious if you think if he keeps trending in that direction, if he could reach that mark of a 10-plus WAR season.
Yeah, I admire your impulse to pursue novelty, but not talking about PCA right now. It's like if I hosted a podcast about the 90s Bulls, I bet Jordan would come up every week.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that's it's dangerous to put those people in the same sentence. Flashback 3 months, and I was among his doubters. Is it likely that he ends up with 10 WAR? No. I think there's a round of adjustments ahead. Yeah. Teams are going to learn how to attack what is still an extremely aggressive approach, right? He swings at everything still. It's just he's learned how to put the barrel on it when he swings. Some of that was already there in the swing shape. And what I thought would need to happen was he'd reel in the swing, reel in the chase, reel in even some of the swings within the zone and get to more of that power that was there in what the swing looked like. I don't know. Somehow he is not needed to back off swinging, and he's still gotten to all that power. And you layer that in with the other stuff that we know he does well, and the crazy steps forward he's taken. He plays such a smart game for a guy who gives off this energy of just reckless lunatic. It's a much more measured overall game that he plays. That it was in Washington, right? That he drew the third baseman's attention when that guy just needed to throw the ball over to first
on a ground ball. Yeah.
He magoed him. He omagoed him. And that's that kind of IQ stuff. I don't think I knew that was in PCA either. So he's going to another level. Does that mean he ends up with 10 more? Probably not, but only probably. And that's, even if you told me that he'd have numbers like this at this point in the year 3 months ago, I would have guessed that I'd be far more skeptical of them holding up than I actually am, because I watch how he's doing it and I see lots of evidence that it's part of his natural process. It's part of a deeper understanding of the game than maybe I gave him credit for in the first place.
That play in Washington that you're referencing, and I'm sure it's, shining the light bulb above people's heads like they're, remembering it as well. It's one that it doesn't show up in a box score. It doesn't show up, necessarily in a game summary. But
I want him stat for that, but I have no idea how to.
I know, but I like how you said he Almago'd the third baseman.
Yeah.
And again, this was a couple weeks ago, but for those who didn't see it, ground ball to the third baseman. PCA's the runner at third. And PCA just like locks eyes with the third baseman, and he just starts like wiggling and dancing just far enough off third base that it just captured the full attention of the Nationals' third baseman, to the point where he hesitated so long on what he was going to do that you got a runner barreling down the first base line, and then PCA easily gets back to third base. It was just those high IQ plays give you just more. It injects more confidence into you that he's like, could be on the track to being just a well-rounded player. Because I agree, I think it's rare, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, whatever, I think it's rare to have the athlete that plays with like reckless abandon, but also is like super, super intelligent at the same time. Like having that balance, I think is so cool to see with PCA. And you brought up like the chase rate is as bad as it gets, right? Like I think he's in the first percentile in all of baseball in that department. And I don't know if you caught it, but Jed Hoyer was on the New York Post Sports YouTube channel with Joel Sherman and John Heyman, and he was asked about all the awesome things PCA has done so far this year. They brought up the chase rate specifically, and I found Jed Hoyer's answer to be very, very interesting, where he said point blank, with how confident and how well PCA is playing, they aren't planning on like tinkering with that right now, which I like, because as daunting as it looks, where he is just a complete free swinger, and it feels like almost a disservice to label it that, like he is to the truest core a pure free swinger. But I like that they're not messing with it, because I don't think you want to add more to his mind right now. Just kind of let him go out and be himself. I think if there was like a really, really long, prolonged drought during the season, maybe you bring it up. But my opinion on that, Matt, is if that's not the case, with how he's playing, I think you can put that on the back burner, maybe until the off season, and then start to address it. Because like you said, he's swinging at everything still, in the zone, out of the zone, but the good outweighs the bad. And I don't think you try to fill up his mind with more thoughts and try to maybe take a layer of that aggressiveness away, when the aggressiveness, again, to me, the good is better than the bad is with PCA and on that front.
Yeah. I mean, the tilt in his swing, his best contact is just, it's home runs. It's home runs, it's doubles, it's triples, right? What I think is interesting, and I probably underestimated, is how much when he mishits the ball, it's not just his speed that creates value there. When he mishits it, sometimes it still is a flare that's just going to drop over the infield. That's how his swing is wired. So I was just too low on his hit tool. And I haven't gotten to listen to the podcast you're referring to yet. I did see that Hoyer did it. I'll be interested to check the tone on what he said. But from what you're relaying to me, I hear a little bit of a difference from, do you remember when, they'd ask the same questions about Javi? We keep tying this back to Javi, but it's natural. They'd ask the same questions of Theo and of Jed and of Joe Madden about Javi. And they would say things like, you got to let Javi be Javi. You don't want to take that away from him. But it always, if you listen close, there was always a comma and a sort of implicit but after that phrase. You could hear them going, you don't want to take it away from him. But we're not sure that this can hold up, was basically what they were communicating, whether explicitly or implicitly. It does feel like they're more convicted, more, ready to just believe that this process works for PCA. It may not work for 10 years, but I don't think they have the same level of anxiety that this approach is going to catch up to him, that they always seem to have about Javi. which is, maybe it wasn't fair to Javi, or maybe it's a little too generous to PCA. We'll only find out with time. But you hear about his process, his preparation, his routine, how he shows up to the park early for tee work and stuff. I do think there's probably a foundation for that. And that shows up too in things like the improvements in his routes and his jumps this year in the field. I didn't see that coming. So this guy might just be a little more of a baseball genius than we understood.
Yeah, I do want to throw the one quote your way. And again, I can't, relay the tone that Jed Hoyer said it in.
Right.
But to me, it was Hoyer sounding like they're willing and wanting to put it on the back burner for now with how he's playing. The quote, Matt, this is again Jed Hoyer talking on the New York Sports Post YouTube channel, talking about the chase rate and the swing rate for PCA. He said, "I don't really see that changing right now with the way he's going. He's able to touch a lot of pitches, and as a result, I think that gives him confidence to do it. I think for now it's going to be a hard thing to change. I do think over time, my guess is that the swing rate will come down a little bit." So that was his quote about it. To me, it sounds like a guy who I think it is just good outweighs the bad, and so they don't want to mess with a good thing. That's kind of what I took from it. Not sure if you have similar thoughts.
And maybe that, just from that last part, that he sort of sees organically that as PCA gets more reps at this level, he'll learn not to swing at certain stuff. That's my instant takeaway anyway. It'll be interesting. It's a delicate balance that they have to strike, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to ruin it all for you because I thought it was a really good listen. I just thought it was like more open, a more open side of Jed Hoyer than what I've seen in other interviews. He doesn't, typically do a lot of sit down, long form podcasts. It's more, talking to the media. But I thought he gave some really good info. And again, I don't want to ruin it all, but he went into detail about the trade back in 2021 when Javi Baez as a rental went to the Mets and they get PCA back. And how he framed it was the Mets basically jump-started the dialogue once they dove into it by immediately taking guys off the table, prospects that most of them have now risen to the major league level for the Mets. But that PCA wasn't one of those guys. In the podcast episode, Hoyer said Matt Allen was immediately taken off the table. Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, and Mark Vientos all were no, we're not even having the discussion. If we're getting Javier Baez, those guys are off the table. And Hoyer said an injury that PCA had suffered earlier in the season made the Mets more willing to part ways with him because of the smaller sample size they had seen. So it's kind of crazy how that stuff all comes together when you think about it, right? Like the Mets got a half year of Javier Baez. He's now in his third season in Detroit, and the Cubs have this guy who, you don't want to get out ahead of yourself, but he looks like a budding superstar in Major League Baseball, and Pete Crow-Armstrong. And it kind of made me wonder. I actually have an article that I wrote up that I'm assuming either you or Brock will have to edit and go through before it gets posted. But I did bring up the thought, like it's crazy to me, Matt, to think, hey, if PCA didn't get hurt in 2021 and the Mets, as a prospect in low A ball and then maybe high A ball, if they would have seen a larger sample size, would PCA had been another name that they had removed from discussions? We'll never have the answer to that, but it's just fascinating that, they brought it to the table as Vientos, don't even bring it up. Beatty, don't bring it up. Matt Allen, don't bring it up. Alvarez, don't bring it up. And then the Cubs are kind of like, well, Pete Crow-Armstrong's name wasn't included. That we're high on him, and that's how it came to be. So that's definitely a trade you look back on, right? And you're like, yeah, the Cubs won that one.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a credit to the Cubs too. It's not just about would the Mets have had him off the table if he were healthy. There are also a lot of teams who will not trade for a guy who's currently hurt with a major injury. He had suffered, I think, a season-ending shoulder injury.
Correct. Yep.
And you were pretty confident he was going to come out the other side of that just fine. But that was a big roll of the dice. They traded Javi just for him. There was no second piece. There was no, hedge there. A lot of front offices will not do that. In fact, there were trades that didn't happen this winter involving the Cubs, specifically because a lot of front offices will not make that kind of deal centered around a player that won't be healthy when the next season begins or something. The Cubs are willing to make that leap, and look how richly it's paid off for them.
Yeah, it's been incredible. Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Matt Trueblood. I am Mitch Widmeyer. Another one of these young studs for the Cubs, highly rated prospects that were kind of watching slowly start to build up more and more experience at the major league level is Cade Horton. I'm curious, Matt, from your advanced eye, what has stood out with Cade Horton so far this year? And again, I have to reference it. Go to northsidebaseball.com, go to our website. You had an awesome article, I thought, talking about the changeup and Cade Horton perhaps needing to trust it more. For me, I see a guy who's not really walking many people. The chase rate's good. He's getting some whiffs. It hasn't been flawless, like by any stretch of the imagination. To me, I kind of, so far, it's kind of a rookie just feeling it out, maybe riding that roller coaster a little bit. So what have you made of Cade Horton so far in his limited sample size at the major league level?
Yeah, I mean, you just named it. To me, it's the changeup, because we knew the fastball was pretty special and we knew the sweeper was probably going to be pretty darn special. I don't think we knew that this changeup was in there. I don't think the Cubs knew this changeup was in there, even if you go back to like spring training. He started throwing this pitch last year before he got hurt. But I don't think anyone understood how good a feel he would develop for it and how devastating it would be playing off, because, it's a changeup that has more run than drop to it, right? It's not a real depthy pitch, but it works well to his arm side, whereas he throws this hard cutting fastball that works mostly to the glove side. The way those two pitches play off each other, with the sweeper to go the other way when, depending on handedness and situation, it just gives a whole new dimension to his arsenal that I didn't know was going to happen. And it's a game changer. It really is. If you thought he was going to be a 3 before, you should think he's going to be a 2 now. If you thought he was going to be a 2 before, he's got a chance to be, not one of the 5 best pitchers in the league, I don't think, but one of the 20 best. And that's saying a ton. Yeah. And I just think, I really do. I'm surprised at how optimistic I feel after just a few starts. Yes, plenty of rough edges to sand off. He is not yet trusting that changeup when it really counts, which lots of guys go through, especially when adding a pitch. It's not just about when do you start being able to execute it. It's when do you start being able to execute it with conviction when you're under pressure. And I don't think he's quite crossed that bridge yet. That's fine. I wouldn't expect him to. I think one of the blessings in disguise of Justin Steele and Shota Imanaga getting hurt is they had to call up Cade Horton. There was no conscious choice here of, well, is it him? Is it Jordan Wicks? Is it like all the other choices fell away? There was really nothing else they were going to do except call him up and install him in the rotation. And so there's really been no pressure here. He's been able to say, yeah, I might get hit around a little. I might not be dominant right away, but I have this spot. I'm not going to lose this spot. And I wasn't given this spot with really high expectations. It's a perfect, they've hit that sweet spot of go get them, learn on the job, because you have to do that in the major leagues anyway. And I am really impressed. I don't know. How do you feel about it? To me, it's been a step beyond what I could have even hoped for.
Same boat as you. I'm in the same boat. And again, you took the words out of my mouth. You hit the nail on the head, however you want to, whatever cliche you want to use. I think it was massive for him. And I think it is for so many of these top prospects that he was able to come up. And part of it was due to injuries in the rotation, right? But he was able to come up without the Cubs, indirectly having to tell him or, motion to him, like, we need you to be the savior. That's not what this is with Cade Horton. Whereas I think a lot of these top prospects, they're brought up in maybe situations that aren't as advantageous. Maybe they're brought up and, the team's floating around 500, or it's a franchise or an organization that needs a jolt. And I think the Cubs as a whole are a team where there's some pressure to really produce right now and claim the NL Central with the Kyle Tucker move in the offseason and other things they've done. But to me, it is a perfect spot for Cade Horton where he's brought up, and it's not, we need you every fifth day to go out and just dominate. That's not what this is with him. He's having an opportunity where he's getting his feet wet at the major league level, and hopefully he sticks around for the long haul now. But there's not a lot on his shoulders to like carry the weight for an entire rotation, which again, I just think is big for a guy who's a really highly touted prospect. And, even when he was in the minors for Cubs fans, there was major name recognition with Cade Horton because of how highly he was spoken of. So I'm with you that's huge, that he can kind of just go about business, figure this out on the fly without having to be some sort of savior for this team.
Something that you just said really clarified it nicely for me too. It's like, if you offered a young big leaguer a chance to come into any specific type of situation, I think the perfect one is low pressure, high stakes, right? You're not playing in front of 8,000 people. It's not weird and awkward and rebuilding and, you're waiting to really have the experience. You're plunged right into all the good stuff of the big leagues, all the, like I said, high stakes, and yet the pressure isn't focused on you. The way you brought up that, you come up to a good team where it matters what you do, but you're not, number one and everything on your shoulders. I think it's really worked out as well as it could possibly have done. Now, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't and don't desperately want to get Shota Imanaga back and slide him back down the ladder one rung. Obviously you do.
Yeah.
But it's been great so far.
I think too, we can tie this in. His you look at probables moving forward this week, Friday, it's supposed to be Skeens Horton. And that's for me and probably for you and many others, that's appointment television. And Skeens
national stage, man. It's at Wrigley. It's the 120 game. Nobody else playing. Oh, it's gonna be great.
Skeens is in a spot where there is more pressure on his shoulders, but like the Pirates know they're not in a spot where they're like competing for wins and losses. But Skeens particularly is in a position where it's like he is the face of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like, fans are going out when he's starting a game, and it's not because, no offense, it's not fans going out to watch, Andrew McCutchen or Key Brian Hayes. It's like you're going out to watch Paul Skeens every fifth day. So I think he has, more pressure on his shoulders, but it is different. It's not like be our savior and take us to the promised land this year, but it's you're the guy for our organization. You're the face of it. And, results have followed with that. Skeens has been awesome. So I do think Skeens Horton Friday will be incredible. Last question on Horton that I want to lob your direction, Matt. Looking down the road this year, for this year specifically, how do you see usage-wise this going for Cade Horton? Do you think they get to a point where they start to pull it back, limit innings? If the Cubs are, fortunate enough to win the division, to go to the postseason, could he be a bullpen guy instead of a starter guy? I know a lot of it's still really foggy at the moment, but how do you think usage-wise down the road it's playing out this year for Cade Horton with the Cubs?
It's a good question. And I think to the Cubs' credit, they've been pretty clear that they don't buy into the what some people call the Verducci effect, that like you don't want a guy to go more than 30 innings past his previous year's total. That's hokum. It was a bad study that Verducci put together. He keeps bringing it up because it's attached to him now. It's part of the brand. Smart teams know better than that. And if a guy's fully healthy, they're not going to stop him at 110 just because he only pitched 70 the year before or something. At the same time, Cade Horton's really never had a full season. He's never gone to 140 innings or whatever you might hope to get out of him under totally normal circumstances. So I would guess they'll try to slow him down. I would not be shocked at all if later this month Shota comes back. They might go to 6-man rotation for a little bit. Especially if depending on who you need to send down or shuffle out when you bring Imanaga back. But if you can keep a guy like Flexen around as a long reliever, if you can trust a couple of guys out there to get you more than 3 outs at a time when needed, I would love to see them go with 6, stretch everybody out. Keep, because it's not like Matthew Boyd is used to 180 innings.
Yeah.
Right. And at this point, you want to keep Shota fresh. And I would guess they'll find creative ways to stretch out, give him 5 days rest as often as humanly possible, 6 days rest on occasion. And you may even see them do a kind of mid-season buckle mini shutdown. Like, let's give you 3 weeks off, sort of cycle you down and back up. Maybe that means going back to the minors for a short stint. Maybe it just means, hey, does your heel hurt at all?
Yeah.
List. You can't phantom IL guys, but everybody's hurt a little bit. It's not that hard to shelve someone if you need to. I think they'll be cautious. I also don't think if Cade Horton keeps pitching the way he is right now, I think he will take the mound for the Cubs in the playoffs. I don't think there's a Strasburg shutdown type of thing coming here. I don't think that's even in their thoughts. They want him to be a long-term piece, and they also want him to be a part of what they're doing right now and next year. And so that means getting him up to speed. It's unfortunate that his pro career got off to sort of a slow and uneven start, that he had Tommy John in college, that, he had to miss so much of last year, but it doesn't mean you just stop and coddle him and baby him along through all of this. They're going to push a little bit.
How much does you mentioned like the potential or the possibility of at least them floating out the idea maybe of a 6-man rotation once Shota comes back, like at some point? How much does like Ben Brown factor into that as far as similar wavelength with Cade Horton, where maybe at some point the Cubs start, maybe looking at his innings somewhat and his usage and maybe wanting to pepper in larger breaks between starts for him? Do you think that Ben Brown factors into this equation as well?
I do think he could.
Yeah.
And it's folks who are watching can see the rundown here. We're probably about to get into something else that will also affect that. But I think Brown, his long-term role on this team and even what they might want to do with him for the balance of this year is maybe even more uncertain than Horton, just because Horton's, I think, more obviously a guy you want to be a part of your rotation for the next half decade or more. There are fewer questions around him in that regard. So you're going to make more decisions about him that are programmed based on keeping him stretched out that way and also preserving his health. Whereas Brown, it might come down a little bit more to what is he capable of and what best suits the needs of the team.
Let's finish up then with this last bullet point. More pressing need at the deadline as it approaches, in your opinion. And is it the bullpen or the rotation? And I'm in a spot where if someone chewed my ear off for 20 minutes convincing me of the rotation, I'd hear it out. If someone went the other way with the bullpen and wanted to chew my ear off for 20 minutes, I'd hear them out. I see both angles of it. Just curious on your thoughts. I will note Jed Hoyer in that same podcast that he was on YouTube on the New York Post Sports channel. He said I'm slightly paraphrasing, but he said it is no secret that we plan on adding in both departments. So it won't be surprising if the Cubs add rotation, add bullpen. To you, what is the more pressing need for them?
I think the more pressing need is probably in the rotation, just because I would worry about getting from here to game 162 with the starters you have. I would worry about Colin Ray, who's pitched quite well for the Brewers over the last couple of years. He also kind of runs out of steam in August and September. No fault of, conditioning or preparation or anything. And he's a big guy. It's just how his body, his arm, his stuff profile works. Matthew Boyd, we just talked about what the risks look like there. You've got Horton, you've got Brown. I would want to add to the rotation just to make sure that I get all the way to the postseason and I still have a rotation, that I can send someone out who I have a modicum of faith in come game 1 of the postseason. Obviously, and I can add a little bit of my own reporting here too, that they are after both. They fully intend to make an addition to each that will be, that's not like the last guy in the pen and the very bottom guy in the rotation. If they have their druthers, they'll make multiple additions between now and July 31st. And it'll probably be one of each. But you don't always get your druthers. So obviously they'll see what plays out. And Jed Hoyer's not afraid to walk away if he's not getting what he feels is a fair deal on stuff. But I think they'll do both. I think the rotation's the more important. It's where I would put more of the resources. And obviously it's what costs more. Right. Even at the deadline where everybody's clamoring to try and build the super bullpen for October, a really good starter costs more in trade than a really good reliever. So I think that's where they'll allocate their resources. It's what I would be doing, just also because you have one guy to that rotation and moving Ben Brown to the bullpen becomes more viable. moving Colin Ray into the bullpen becomes more viable. All those things, it opens up a lot more things for you than you have one guy to the bullpen. It's great. And it does probably mean you're not turning to Chris Flexen or even Drew Pomeranz come the NLDS. But you, I don't know, adding someone to that pen doesn't strengthen the rotation in the same way that the opposite is true, right?
Yeah, you answered this too. How critical is it? Because you said, I want to talk about the rotation first, if you don't mind. You said adding someone that isn't just like the fifth guy in the rotation. And so I'm curious how critical you think it is for them to add someone that maybe could be a 2 or a 3 in the rotation. I just, for me, Matt, I am so pleased with how the Cubs have performed so far this year. But I do have, and it's not a knock on either guy, it isn't, but I do have my doubts and reservations about going into the postseason if the Cubs make it and having Taillon or Boyd as your number 2 and the other as your potential number 3. Like when I'm thinking about stacking up against the Dodgers or, the Phillies, Bryce Harper is going to get healthy at some point. He'll be back in the lineup and off the shelf, especially in October. That would be the realistic expectation for the Phillies if they're a team. The Mets, like when I'm thinking about some of these teams Chicago could potentially go up against, I have doubts about Taillon and Boyd being your 2, 3 and an interchangeable order, which is why I think, to me at least, and I pose the question to you, it would be a more pressing matter and bring about more urgency to add not just a filler piece to the rotation, but someone that I think they could seriously look at for a postseason series and be like, yeah, we feel good about this guy that we trade for being our 2 or a 3 for the postseason. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
And then it just comes down to the obvious question, right? Okay, who?
And what's the price? Yeah.
Right. Can you really do it? And I think that's the Cubs farm system is not in tatters, nor is it in pristine condition. Some of their top prospects, some of the guys that they might have viewed as the best trade chips coming into the season are having rough years or have dealt with injury issues or both. And that eats into what you can do a little bit, right? The fact that the Cubs don't have extra draft picks ever, that they're hoping not to be picking in the lottery next year, eats into what you can do a little bit because you still want to have a sustainable, an idea that this is the beginning of something, not just a blip of a year or two. So I think they'll have to find just the right thing. And that's going to be a longish process. That's why I think everyone would love if you could jump out and sort of jump the market, but it's probably not realistic for multiple reasons. One of them just being what this team does and doesn't have available to it to make that kind of a move with right now. And the other being what people are actually willing to move. Who's that pitcher going to be? And is it going to be a thing where you want to gamble on stuff and a little more team control? Or do you want to just go get a guy like Chris Sale? He's the big obvious name who's only, he's old. He's under contract only through next year. And of course, Atlanta has to be willing to deal. But if he does, it's going to cost a bit. And then you're going to have a new number 1 in your playoff rotation. That would be enormous. And it would be worth almost any price that the Cubs are actually capable of paying. It's just that's not on the table right now. And for it to be on the table is going to take more groundwork, more, circling toward things and being both patient and opportunistic. So you don't miss that opening when it comes, either because a team is briefly considering moving a guy and then doesn't, or even worse, you get jumped at and somebody else gets the guy you had your eye on in mid-July or something. So that's the challenge. It's going to be a fascinating trade season for the Cubs this year.
Yeah, I do think with you pose the best question, right? Who, and then what's the price? Every trade deadline is different as far as kind of how it molds and comes to be and takes shape. I do think, in my opinion, just the names that have been floated out there that maybe could potentially become available as far as starting pitcher pieces, it's more interesting because, 2 of the names I've seen floated out there that, hey, maybe this guy becomes available at some point before the deadline. 2 of the names I've seen recently, Sandy Alcantara for the Marlins, and peak of his powers, you're talking about a true ace. This year, you're talking about a guy who's struggling mightily and is trying to figure it out on the go. And the other name is based off where they're trending towards Arizona and Corbin Burns, elbow he's done for the year, and Arizona's kind of sinking in an ever competitive NL West where the Dodgers are going to be good, the Padres are going to be good, and the Giants are still kind of hanging out there too. Zach Gallen is the other name where, again, peak of his powers, you're talking about a guy, in my opinion, is an ace of a staff. This year has looked far from it. And so the who for the Cubs, do they take, would they be entertained by a name that in the past, if you look at a large sample size, really good and there's heavy name recognition, but this year, not so good with guys like Alcantara and Gallen? I'm curious to see how that kind of takes shape for the Cubs too. I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah. From what I know so far, and I'm always poking around on this stuff. Sometimes people are willing to talk, sometimes they're not. I don't sense that the Cubs are especially hopeful of Gallen turning things around real soon. It's been a bummer to watch. I'm not sure if he's pitching through something or what, but it hasn't been great for him. Sandy Alcantara's more of I think the Cubs would love to make that move right now. I don't think the Marlins are ready to make it because they want to see him. The raw stuff for Alcantara is basically back. He's down a tick, but you can live down a tick. He was more than a tick beyond what he needed before he got
yeah.
The location's gone wrong, and especially on his secondaries, his slider, the location is just really bad. He does not have the command back, which we've been hearing this for a quarter century as we've gotten used to people coming back from Tommy John, right? The command's the last thing to return with an elbow injury. I think a lot of teams would love to circle in and pluck up Sandy Alcantara right now so that they can be the ones who benefit when the command does find its way back. And they'll roll those dice and say, look, if it's not this year and we aren't able to put him on our playoff roster, so be it. We will take that chance. I think the Marlins want to see if between now and mid-July, there starts to be more evidence of that, because then they can get a way better price than they could get trading him right now. You know what I mean? So again, it's that question of who actually becomes available and who do you only hope is, and whether, is right now there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope throughout the league that Gallen's a quick fix. But if you've got just the right guy who thinks he has spotted what's going on, or that even just a change of scenery would be good for Gallen, okay, give it a shot. And we'll see where the Cubs land on all of that. I do think both of those are organizations that they are comfortable talking to. They can make deals with. They almost had a deal for Jesus Luzardo over the offseason. Jed Hoyer and Mike Hazen, the GM of the Diamondbacks, go way back. So there's going to be opportunities with both of those guys. It's just a matter of timing and what kinds of risks each side's interested in taking.
Let's finish up with the bullpen. And again, I am in no way asking you to just, spill all the beans, everything, but with the bullpen, do you see the Cubs being in a spot where it's not as though they're approaching it? And I'm not speaking for them. I'm saying this is how I'm viewing it through my lens, asking if you think the Cubs will take a similar approach. Do you see them looking at, in addition to the bullpen, as a guy where it's not like, hey, we absolutely need to go target a closer, someone who come in the ninth, or is it just, let's go get someone solid who's a good piece to have on our chessboard? Is that how they're approaching adding to the bullpen, or how you think they'll approach it?
That is how Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer have approached every trade deadline of their combined careers when they were buying, except for 2016. This team has a chance to do special things just because of, the variance that's around here and the particular shape of the league. But these are not the 2016 Cubs. So they're not going to go out with the idea of, let's do whatever it takes to get an Aroldis check. I guess this year that would be probably like a Mason Miller.
Yeah.
They're not willing to just throw everything at that kind of a deal. That said, I think they would love to add depth, and it's going to be, if they can help it, it's going to be someone more like, I remember the 2017 deal for Justin Wilson, which could have worked out better, but the thought there was he's your sort of second or third best reliever this year, and you hope that you can keep developing him. And Wade Davis was going to leave as a free agent after that season, and they were going to say, now you step into sort of relief ace status. I think they would love to make a deal kind of like that one this year for that guy who is not just an extra arm in your pen. He's truly deepening your selection of guys you trust in high leverage. But who becomes available again is definitely the question. And even more than the starter market, I think they feel that market hasn't developed yet, that it's not clear who is and isn't going to fall on each side of that line. So a lot more of a wait and see approach, which is what you have to do with relievers, because almost any team who is going to sell a reliever wants to wait until as close to the deadline as possible. That's when teams start to scramble and have a clearer idea of how much they're willing to pay to try and make an October run with a guy.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how it comes together in the weeks leading up to the trade deadline, especially since it really feels like a foregone conclusion that the Cubs will be active to very active at the deadline. 2 more against the Phillies. Again, we're recording on Tuesday for a Wednesday publish. Cubs head back to Wrigley, as Matt alluded to. Friday, standalone spot, 1:20. You know, the bleacher creatures will be out there at Wrigley Field. Paul Skeens against Cade Horton. So the Cubs have 2 more against the Phillies, then 4 against the Pirates. Matt, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. Enjoy the game tonight at Target Field for the Twins, covering that, and we appreciate the time. This has been the Northside Baseball Podcast. We'll see you next week.